Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. This question came up while I was building my next EDH deck, Vorinclex, and I thought it was a really cool interaction, so I wanted to make a video about it. Amy pays to turn her Vorinclex into the Grand Evolution. With its Chapter 1 ability, she mills and returns Kozilek and Eternal Witness. Can she return another card that was milled with Eternal Witness before Kozilek's ability shuffles all her graveyard away? Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need in order to answer this question is an important fact about how triggered abilities work, which is that the time when they trigger is not the same as the time when they get put on the stack. A fun analogy that I like to use is that the fairies who are in charge of triggered abilities know on their whiteboard any time an ability triggers, but that ability does not get put onto the stack until a player is about to get priority. So let's take a look at how that applies to the situation described in the original problem statement. When the Grand Evolution's Chapter 1 ability resolves, the first thing that will happen is that Amy will mill 10. This will cause the ability of Kozilek to trigger because it was put into a graveyard. The fairies will write this ability down on their whiteboard. Let's note that if the Kozilek ability resolved immediately after it triggered, that would mean that if you milled it like this, then you wouldn't even get to return any cards with the Chapter 1 ability. The next thing that happens is that Amy will return Kozilek and Eternal Witness to the battlefield. This causes Eternal Witness's ability to trigger, and so the fairies will write it on their whiteboard too. Now that all of the steps involved in the Chapter 1 ability have been completed, then the game will perform state-based actions, and then the triggered abilities from the whiteboard will be put onto the stack. Since Amy controls both of them, she chooses their order. Another important fact to note is that this is a free choice. She doesn't have to choose an order that corresponds to the order that the ability is triggered. The logical order for Amy here is for the Eternal Witness to resolve first, and then the Kozilek, which corresponds to the order that would happen if she put them on the stack in the same order that they triggered. But the other order is a perfectly legal choice if for some reason Amy didn't want to return a card with EWit's ability. One other kind of interesting point about this situation has to do with something I said before about state-based actions. I mentioned that state-based actions are checked before the triggered abilities are put onto the stack. That's important for this question because targets for triggered abilities are chosen as part of the process of putting them onto the stack. This means that if a state-based action were to cause something to be put into Amy's graveyard, then that would be a valid target for Eternal Witness's ability. This could happen, for example, if Amy already controlled another legendary permanent named Kozilek Butcher of Truth while this was happening. Or maybe a little bit easier to achieve if Nick controlled something like an Elish Norn, which would reduce EWit's toughness below 0. In either case, the affected permanent would be put into Amy's graveyard before she chose the target of Eternal Witness's ETB ability, which means that she could return that card to her hand with it. Pretty cool, right? But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.